The morning sun cast long shadows across the ancient vines as I walked through my grandfather's vineyard. To correction, my vineyard now. Rows of gnarled grapevines stretched toward the horizon, their leaves rustling in the early autumn breeze. 30 years of memories lived in these vines, though my family seemed eager to forget them all. I'm James Barrett, and at 42 I just made the biggest investment of my life without telling a soul. My sister Victoria would call it a foolish nostalgia play. My parents would label it another example of my inability to move forward. But standing here watching the sun rise over the hills of Barrett Valley Vineyards, I knew I'd made the right choice. "Mr. Barrett," a voice called from behind me. "The property assessor is here." Marcus, the vineyard's longtime foreman, approached with a tablet in hand. He was one of the few who knew about my secret purchase, mainly because I needed his help to keep the operation running while I maintained my cover as a potential buyer. "How bad is it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. 3 years of neglect had taken their toll on the once prestigious estate. The main irrigation system needs a complete overhaul. About 30% of the vines need serious attention. The processing facility, he hesitated. "Well, let's just say it's good you have capital to invest." I nodded, having anticipated most of these issues. What Marcus didn't know was that I'd spent the last year developing a comprehensive renovation plan, complete with modernization strategies and sustainable farming techniques. While my family had written off the vineyard as a lost cause, I'd been meticulously planning its revival. "Mr. Barrett," Marcus continued, his voice lower now, "your sister's real estate team was here again yesterday. They seemed pretty confident about something." Of course they were. Victoria had been trying to sell the vineyard to developers for months, not knowing I'd already secured controlling interest through a series of quiet purchases from various family members who'd inherited shares over the years. "When's the family meeting?" Marcus asked. "Tonight," I replied, checking my watch. "Victoria's called everyone together to discuss the vineyard's future. Should be interesting." Marcus gave me a knowing look. He'd worked these vines for 20 years and had watched my grandfather build something extraordinary. He'd also watched it nearly fall apart after my grandfather's death, when my family's competing visions had paralyzed any decisive action. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said quietly. "He always said you were the only one who truly understood what he was building here." I remembered those long summers working alongside my grandfather, learning every aspect of the winemaking process. While Victoria spent her time in the tasting room charming tourists, I was in the fields, learning about soil composition, pruning techniques, and the subtle art of cultivation. "We should head back," I said, noticing the assessment team arriving. "Let's see what we're really dealing with." The morning passed in a blur of technical discussions and detailed inspections. The assessment confirmed what I'd suspected: the vineyard needed significant investment, but its fundamental qualities, the wine stock, the positioning, were still exceptional. By late afternoon, I was in my car, driving toward my parents' house for the family meeting. Victoria's text messages had been increasingly insistent throughout the day, each one hinting at some major announcement. I could practically feel her smugness through the phone. The family estate came into view. A sprawling Victorian mansion that had been in our family for generations. Cars already lined the circular driveway, suggesting I was the last to arrive. Typical. Victoria always liked to have everyone in place before making her grand entrances. Inside, the familiar scene played out. My parents sat in their usual spots in the living room, my father absently swirling a glass of wine, not from our vineyard. He'd declared it undrinkable 2 years ago, my mother fussing with the arrangement of appetizers she'd probably spent hours preparing. Various cousins and aunts occupied the peripheral seating, all of them minor shareholders in the vineyard. All of them blissfully unaware that they no longer owned their shares. I'd purchased them through a holding company over the past year, offering generous prices that they'd eagerly accepted. "James." Finally, Victoria swept into the room, immaculate in her designer suit. At 38, she'd made a name for herself in luxury real estate development, though mainly by destroying old properties to build new ones. "We've been waiting." "Traffic," I said simply, accepting a glass of wine from our mother. I noted with some amusement that it was a cheap California blend. How far we'd fallen from the days when only Barrett Valley wines were served in this house. Well, now that everyone's here, Victoria began, moving to the center of the room with practiced poise. I have some exciting news about the vineyard. She pulled out a sleek presentation folder, passing copies to our parents first. As you know, I've been working tirelessly to find the best solution for our challenging property situation. I settled into a corner armchair, watching the show unfold. Victoria had always been good at presentations. It was the follow-through where she typically fell short. I'm thrilled to announce that Sterling Development Group has made an offer to purchase Barrett Valley Vineyards. She continued, her voice rising with excitement. Their proposal includes a luxury housing development, a boutique hotel, and a small wine tasting facility to maintain the character of the property. Our mother gasped in delight, while our father nodded approvingly. The other family members began murmuring among themselves, no doubt calculating their potential profits. The offer is well above market value, Victoria added, flipping to a page of financial projections. Given the vineyard's current condition and the state of the wine market, this represents an incredible opportunity. What about the vines? I asked quietly. The ones grandfather spent 30 years cultivating. Victoria's smile tightened slightly. James, be realistic. The vineyard is losing money. The equipment is outdated. The wine hasn't been rated above 85 points in 3 years. Sterling's proposal will preserve a small portion of the vines for aesthetic purposes. Aesthetic purposes, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. So instead of wine grapes, there'll be landscaping for luxury homes. It's time to move forward, she insisted. The market for small batch wines is dying. High-end real estate in wine country, however, is booming. Our father cleared his throat. She has a point, James. The vineyard hasn't been profitable since your grandfather passed. Sometimes we have to accept change. I took a slow sip of the mediocre wine in my glass, thinking about the contracts safely stored in my lawyer's office. And Sterling Development is ready to move forward immediately. Victoria's smile widened. They're prepared to begin work as soon as the papers are signed. In fact, she paused for dramatic effect. Their team is coming tomorrow to begin preliminary surveys. That might be a problem, I said, pulling out my phone and pulling up a particular email. What do you mean? Victoria's smile faltered slightly. The property already has a new owner. I turned my phone to show the ownership documentation. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria snatched the phone from my hand, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling as she scrolled through the documents. This isn't possible, she whispered. How did you? I've spent the last year buying shares from every family member who wanted to sell. I explained, looking around the room at the suddenly uncomfortable faces of our relatives. Most of them were quite happy to unload what they considered worthless stock. Our father stood up, his wine glass forgotten. James, what have you done? What grandfather would have wanted? I replied calmly. I'm preserving his legacy, not destroying it for a quick profit. Victoria's face had gone from shock to furious. You went behind our backs. How dare you? I've spent months working on this deal. And I've spent years learning every aspect of this business. I countered. While you were planning to tear it down, I was developing plans to build it back up. I stood and walked to my briefcase, pulling out my own presentation materials. Unlike Victoria's glossy projections, mine were filled with detailed agricultural analyses, renovation plans, and market research. The vineyard doesn't need to be destroyed, I explained, laying out the documents. It needs proper investment and management. I've secured financing for a complete modernization of the facilities, hired a top-tier vintner as consultant, and already begun implementing sustainable farming practices. Victoria was shaking her head, her voice taking on the condescending tone she'd perfected over the years. You're throwing good money after bad. The wine market is evolving, not dying, I cut in. Our grandfather understood that success in this business comes from adaptation and innovation, not demolition and replacement. Our mother, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. But James, the cost, the risk, is mine to take, I said firmly. I own controlling interest now. The renovation begins next week. Victoria grabbed her presentation folders, shoving them back into her designer bag. You'll regret this. Sterling won't wait forever. When this fails, it won't fail. I interrupted. Because unlike you, I actually know this business. I've lived it, and more importantly, I believe in it. As my sister stormed out of the room, our relatives began to filter out, many of them avoiding my eyes. They'd sold their shares without consulting anyone, and now they were realizing what they'd given up. My father approached me last, his expression unreadable. Your grandfather always said you had his spirit, he said quietly. I never really understood what he meant until now. He taught me everything I know about the vineyard, I replied. While everyone else saw it as a burden, he showed me its potential. Looking out the window at the setting sun painting the distant vineyard hills in golden light, I could almost hear my grandfather's voice. Wine isn't made in a day, son. It takes patience, dedication, and most of all faith in what you're building. I had all three in abundance, and now finally I had the chance to prove it. The first month of renovation at Barrett Valley Vineyards revealed challenges even I hadn't anticipated. While inspecting the wine cellar with Marcus, we discovered that several premium vintages from my grandfather's private collection, wines meant to be aged for special occasions, had been improperly stored during the years of neglect. This is a disaster, Marcus said, holding up a bottle where the cork had clearly failed. Some of these wines were meant to be the vineyard's legacy vintages. I examined the ruined bottle, recognizing the label from 1985, the year my grandfather had won his first major award. How many are still viable? Maybe 30%. The temperature control failed years ago, and nobody bothered to check. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with an alert. Victoria had just posted a lengthy LinkedIn article about the death of traditional vineyards, complete with thinly veiled references to outdated family operations refusing to accept market realities. Your sister's not giving up, is she? Marcus asked, noting my expression. She never does. I pocketed my phone, but neither do I. Let's focus on what we can save. We spent the next several hours cataloging the remaining viable wines and documenting the losses. What to say, Dad? Each ruined bottle felt like losing a piece of history, but it also strengthened my resolve to restore the vineyard to its former glory. Later that afternoon, I had an unexpected visitor. Sarah Chen, the renowned wine critic who'd been my grandfather's friend, arrived unannounced. I heard rumors about renovation work, she said, surveying the construction equipment dotting the property. Thought I'd see for myself what young James Barrett was up to. Sarah had been one of the few critics who'd continued supporting the vineyard even during its decline, always insisting that the terroir was too special to abandon. Would you like a tour? I offered, grateful for a friendly face after weeks of family tension. As we walked through the vineyard, I explained my vision for modernizing, while preserving the essential character that had made Barrett Valley wines special. Sarah listened intently, occasionally nodding or asking pointed questions about specific techniques. Your grandfather would approve, she said finally, stopping to examine a cluster of grapes. He always said you were the one who understood that winemaking is about balance. Between tradition and innovation, between patience and progress. Victoria thinks I'm living in the past, Sarah snorted. Victoria thinks anything older than last season's fashion is obsolete. She never understood that true luxury can't be manufactured, it has to be cultivated. Just then, we heard the sound of approaching vehicles. 3 black SUVs were making their way up the main drive, and I recognized the Sterling Development logo on their sides. Speaking of Victoria, I muttered. Excuse me, Sarah, I need to handle this. I reached the main building, just as Victoria emerged from the lead vehicle, followed by several men in expensive suits. James, she called out, her voice carrying that false cheerfulness she used in business settings. I thought it was time my partners saw the property themselves. The property isn't for sale, I replied calmly. As you well know, one of the men stepped forward, extending his hand. Tom Sterling, your sister has told us so much about this charming operation. I didn't take his hand. This charming operation is a private property, and you're trespassing. Now, James, Victoria interjected, don't be difficult. Mr. Sterling's team just wants to do a preliminary survey. Their offer still stands. No surveys, no offers. The vineyard is not for sale. Sterling's friendly expression hardened slightly. Mr. Barrett, Let's be realistic. Small vineyards like this are dying. Our development could preserve some of the atmosphere while creating real value. Real value. Sarah's voice cut through the tension as she joined us. Do you know anything about wine, Mr. Sterling? He blinked, clearly recognizing her. Miss Chen, I didn't expect. Clearly not, she said dryly. Because if you did, you'd know that this small vineyard has some of the most unique terroir in the region. The soil composition here is practically impossible to replicate. Victoria's perfect smile wavered. Sarah, while we appreciate your expertise in wine, this is a business decision. Everything's a business decision with you, Victoria, I said. That's why you never understood what grandfather built here. This isn't just land to be carved up and sold off. It's a legacy. A legacy that's losing money, she snapped, her facade cracking. While you play farmer, I'm trying to save this family from financial disaster. The only disaster here is your inability to see beyond quick profits. I turned to Sterling. This is your only warning. Leave now, or I'll have you escorted off the property. As if on cue, Marcus appeared with several of our workers. Sterling looked at them, then at his watch, then at Victoria. Perhaps we should continue this discussion another time, he said smoothly. Victoria, we'll be in touch. After they left, Sarah placed a hand on my arm. You know they won't give up easily. I know. I watched the SUVs disappear down the drive. But neither will I. That evening, as I was reviewing renovation plans in my grandfather's old office, I found a letter he'd written to me years ago, tucked inside a book about vintage cultivation techniques. The paper had yellowed with age, but his words were as clear as ever. James, my boy, remember that wine is like truth. It can't be rushed, and it can't be faked. When others push for quick returns, stand firm in your conviction that some things are worth the wait. This land has stories to tell, and you're the one I trust to tell them. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more resistance, more attempts to derail what I was building. But sitting there, surrounded by the evidence of my grandfather's life's work, I knew I was on the right path. The real question was, how far would Victoria go to stop me? The first signs of Victoria's retaliation came subtly. Local suppliers suddenly became hesitant to work with us, citing scheduling conflicts. Then our loan application for additional renovation funding was mysteriously delayed. The pattern was clear. My sister was using her business connections to make things difficult. But she'd forgotten one crucial detail. I'd spent years building my own network in the wine industry, relationships formed through genuine interest rather than manipulation. I was discussing these challenges with Sarah Chen over a bottle of one of our surviving vintage reserves when my phone buzzed with an urgent message from Marcus. The water's been cut off, he reported, his voice tense. County says there's an issue with our irrigation permits. Sarah raised an eyebrow as I explained the situation. Let me guess, the complaint came from a development company, Sterling Development's Environmental Division. I confirmed. They're claiming our water usage threatens local wildlife. The same wildlife they'd displace with their luxury homes. Sarah shook her head. Your sister's getting desperate. I was already dialing my lawyer's number when Victoria herself walked into the tasting room, looking triumphant. Water problems? She asked innocently. That must be difficult during harvest season. You know, for someone who claims to care about family legacy, you're working awfully hard to destroy it. I said, studying her carefully. I'm trying to save us all from your stubborn romanticism, she snapped. Look around, James. This place is dying. Sterling's offer won't last forever. Neither will their development. Sarah interjected. But these vines, with proper care, they'll produce exceptional wines for generations. Victoria turned to her, eyes narrowing. Why are you really here, Sarah? Surely a critic of your standing has better things to do than champion a failing vineyard. I'm here because your brother understands something you never did. Sarah replied calmly. True value isn't built in a day. It's cultivated over years, decades even. How poetic, Victoria sneered. Perhaps you can put that in your next review of our mediocre wines. I stood up slowly. Our wines aren't mediocre, Victoria. They were neglected. There's a difference. Keep telling yourself that, she said, turning to leave. But when the bank starts calling about those loan payments, remember, I tried to help. After she left, I walked out to the vineyard, needing to clear my head. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the vines, and despite the water's shutdown, the grapes were thriving. We'd modernized the irrigation system just in time, making it far more efficient than the county's outdated records showed. My phone buzzed again. This time with unexpected good news. Our lawyer had not only resolved the water permit issue but had uncovered evidence of Sterling Development's involvement in filing the false complaint. "Your sister's getting sloppy," Sarah commented when I told her. "She's used to people backing down when she applies pressure." She never did understand the difference between pressure and persistence. I agreed. Grandfather tried to teach us both, but she was always looking for shortcuts. That evening I called an emergency meeting with our core team. Marcus, our new vintner consultant, and several longtime employees gathered in the main office. "Victoria's going to keep coming after us," I explained, "but we have something she doesn't. Actual knowledge of this business and its potential." I laid out our strategy: accelerated renovation of key facilities, aggressive marketing of our upcoming vintage, and a complete documentation of our sustainable practices. If Victoria wanted a war of attrition, she'd find we were better prepared than she thought. "There's something else," Sarah added, pulling out her tablet. "I wasn't going to mention this yet, but I've been working on a feature article about heritage vineyards in crisis. Barrett Valley is going to be my central focus." As a success story, the implications were clear. Once Sarah's article was published, it would be much harder for Sterling Development to paint us as a failing business ready for demolition. Late that night, as I was finishing up paperwork, I found another of my grandfather's old notebooks. Inside was a detailed analysis of every vintage he'd produced, including notes about failures and lessons learned. One entry caught my eye. 1992. Worst drought in decades. Victoria said we should sell. James suggested we deep plant new rootstock. The boy understands. Sometimes the hardest times reveal the strongest vines. I smiled, remembering that year. I'd been just starting college, but I'd spent every weekend at the vineyard, helping implement the deep planting strategy. The resulting wines had been some of our best. A knock at the door interrupted my reminiscence. To my surprise, it was our father. "Your mother's worried about you," he said, settling into a chair. "She thinks this fight with Victoria is tearing the family apart." "Victoria's doing that all on her own," I replied, "by trying to destroy what grandfather built." He was quiet for a moment, looking around the office that had changed little since my grandfather's time. "You know, he told me once that he named the vineyard Barrett Valley not just because of our family name, but because he wanted it to be something that united us. A legacy we could all share. And now I'm watching my children tear each other apart over it." He sighed heavily. "But I'm starting to think maybe that's because only one of you truly understood what he was building here." Before I could respond, my phone lit up with multiple notifications. Victoria had just announced a press conference for tomorrow morning to discuss the exciting future of Barrett Valley. "She's going to try to force our hand publicly," I said, already drafting emails to our PR team. My father stood up, straightening his jacket. "Do you want my advice?" I looked up, surprised. He'd been notably absent from most of our recent conflicts. "Let her have her press conference," he said. "But remember what your grandfather always said about wine and truth. They both come out in their own time." I finished the familiar phrase. He nodded. "Show them the truth, son. Not just about the vineyard, but about why it matters." As he left, I looked out at the darkened vineyard, its rows barely visible in the moonlight. Tomorrow would bring another battle in this ongoing war, but for the first time, I felt certain about more than just victory. I understood now that this wasn't really about saving a vineyard. It was about proving that some things can't be reduced to simple profit and loss. Some things have to be believed in, worked for, and given time to reach their full potential. Victoria had never understood that, but tomorrow everyone else would. The morning of Victoria's press conference dawned clear and crisp. I stood in the restored tasting room, watching reporters and local business leaders arrive, each one directed by Sterling Development staff toward a temporary stage set up near the main building. Victoria had chosen her backdrop, while mispositioning the speakers so that the most neglected section of the old storage facilities would be visible behind them. What she didn't know was that we'd been busy all night, preparing our own version of the truth. "Ready?" Sarah asked, joining me at the window. I nodded, checking my watch. "Everything in place. Your father's keeping Victoria distracted. Marcus has the teams positioned. It's time." As Victoria took the stage, looking polished and confident in her designer suit, I moved quietly through the crowd with Sarah. Our own team members were strategically placed throughout the audience, each one ready to play their part. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria began, her practiced smile gleaming, "we're here today to discuss the future of Barrett Valley. For generations, this land has been part of our family legacy, but like all things, time brings change. And with change comes opportunity." She gestured to Tom Sterling, who stood smugly nearby. "Sterling Development has presented us with a vision for a new Barrett Valley, one that will bring prosperity and growth to our community." That was our cue. At my signal, Marcus activated the new state-of-the-art irrigation system we'd installed. The morning sun caught the fine mist as it rose from the vineyards, creating a spectacular rainbow effect. Heads turned, cameras swiveled. "What you're seeing," I said loudly, stepping forward, "is the future of Barrett Valley. Not as a collection of luxury homes, but as a revitalized heritage vineyard embracing sustainable farming practices." Victoria's smile froze as I walked to the stage. Behind her, on my signal, our workers pulled away the tarps, covering the newly renovated storage facility, revealing gleaming modern equipment through the vast glass walls. "My sister talks about change," I continued, addressing the crowd directly. "But she's forgotten what our grandfather knew. That real change isn't about destroying the old to build the new. It's about honoring tradition while embracing innovation." Sarah stepped forward, then distributing copies of her just-published article to the journalists present. I could see Victoria's face growing darker as she realized how thoroughly she'd been outmaneuvered. "Barrett Valley isn't just land to be developed," I said. "It's a living testament to the art of winemaking. And today I'm pleased to announce that our first new vintage, under the modernized operation, has just been rated 94 points by International Wine Review." The crowd murmured with interest. A 94-point rating for a vineyard supposedly on its last legs was big news. "Furthermore," I continued, "we've just signed exclusive distribution agreements with 3 of the country's top restaurant groups. Barrett Valley wines will once again be featured in the finest establishments across the nation." Victoria tried to step in, but her microphone had mysteriously gone dead. In the confusion that followed, I noticed our father standing at the back of the crowd, holding what appeared to be a disconnected audio cable. He gave me a slight nod. "The choice isn't between tradition and progress," I concluded. "It's between quick profit and lasting value. Barrett Valley chooses value. We choose legacy. We choose to believe in what our grandfather started here." The press conference dissolved into chaos after that, with journalists clamoring for details about the renovation and modernization efforts. Sterling Development's representatives slipped away quietly, their planned announcement about acquiring the property rendered moot. Later that evening, I found Victoria sitting alone in the old tasting room, staring at a bottle of our grandfather's 1985 vintage, one of the few that had survived. "You could have been part of this," I said quietly. "Still can be." She looked up, and for a moment I saw past the polished exterior to the sister who used to help me steal grapes from the vine when we were kids. "I don't know how," she admitted. "I don't know this world like you do." "Then learn. That's what grandfather wanted for both of us." She picked up the bottle, studying the label. "He always said you had the patience for it. I never did. Maybe it's time to develop some." 2 weeks later, Victoria surprised everyone by enrolling in a viticulture course at the local college. She still had her real estate business, but now she spent weekends at the vineyard, learning the basics from Marcus. Standing in the tasting room on a busy Saturday afternoon, watching visitors sample our wines, while Victoria earnestly explained the renovation process to tourists, I felt my grandfather's presence stronger than ever. "Well done," Sarah said, joining me with a glass of our new vintage. "Though I suspect this isn't quite the ending Victoria had in mind." "Sometimes," I replied, remembering my grandfather's words, "The best wines come from the most stubborn vines." Outside, the valley stretched away toward the setting sun, the rows of vines casting long shadows across the land our family had worked for generations. Not just land anymore, but a legacy renewed, ready to age into something even better.